everyone, welcome to another edition of Coffee Break. It's Steve Barrett here, the editorial director of PR Week. Really delighted to be here with Jeff DeMarrais, who's CCO at Cognizant, and he's going to chat to us about the company and some of the great work that they've been doing over the past 12 months. But first of all, Jeff, welcome to Coffee Break. Good to have you on board.
Steve, it's great to be here. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, so let's start by telling people a little bit about Cognizant. You know, not everyone is cognizant of Cognizant, to use a joke that you've probably heard a million times before. But it kind of spun out of Dun & Bradstreet in the mid-90s, didn't it? But it's gone on to become a bit of a technological heavyweight and consulting heavyweight. So tell us about what the company does.
Sure. We're headquartered in Teaneck, New Jersey. We're an $18 billion company. Got 300,000 employees around the world, 200,000 of which are in India. We started out as more of a business process outsourcing type model, but we've really evolved into a digital transformation partner in more of a consultancy-based space. This past quarter, which was only a few weeks ago, we actually had our highest quarterly revenue ever at $4.6 billion. We are the largest we've ever been with 301,000 employees, and we had our largest growth on a quarterly basis since 2015. So we're really in the thick of it right now.
And what's driving that? Is that helping people through this sort of really tricky period? What are the drivers that's made you hit those records and numbers?
Yeah, there's a few things. One, absolutely. As folks have coped with working at home and managing businesses through the pandemic, going through digital transformation has become a much higher priority for people. The second thing is, historically, we've been very based in North America. We are now sort of expanding our space around the world and finding new opportunities. And then we've actually moved up the value chain as well as we do digital transformation and help integrate, technologies from Google, Microsoft, AWS, so on and so forth, Salesforce in people's workspaces. That is a higher level work, which is driving greater revenue growth. And, one of the big things for us was to sort of reintroduce ourselves to the world and to reintroduce ourselves to markets in which we've never been.
So give us an example, put some sort of detail on that with a specific piece of work, and tell us the sort of companies maybe that you're going up against when you're bidding for these contracts.
Well, sure. Deloitte and Accenture are two of the companies that we consider, very hefty competitors. Infosys, those are sort of at the top of the table. And then you have our traditional India pure play competitors like Tata and Wipro, so on and so forth. And, how do we increase our voice in that much more competitive set? Part of that is by reintroducing ourselves and our brand. We took some very big swings this past year. We are a Formula One sponsor with Aston Martin. We are a PGA and LPGA sponsor in golf. We're doing sponsorships around sailing, but we've also done some things like sponsorships of an X Prize to help fight the pandemic. We have exponentially increased our foundation to $250 million over a 5-year run rate. So we feel like the ability to both introduce ourselves in places we've never been and then reinforce the technology behind the brand once we're there are really seminal to changing both our brand and our ability to grow the business.
How have those sporting sponsorships played out when, at a time when we've had a bit of a dearth of sport, which it's coming back now, but so how's that been? And also, how do you leverage a sponsorship like that to sort of add business value?
Well, I use Aston Martin as the largest and easiest example in that it was Aston Martin's return to the racing grid for the first time in over 60 years. So we were reintroduced with their brand, which was a great piggyback opportunity for us. The digital and social enhancement around that announcement and subsequent news around the livery, when we painted the chassis with pride stripes, so on and so forth, really opened up new doors and audiences for people to hear about us. But two other things happened which were directly planned with this sponsorship. One was it opened new doors and conversations with clients that maybe knew our name or maybe didn't know our name, but we are the digital transformation partner for Aston Martin Lagonda as well, we're able to showcase some of the work we're doing there. The other thing, frankly, is recruiting. People are very excited about us being involved with that brand, and we hear about it constantly. I'll tell you, I had a variety of interviews with communications people around the world, and one gentleman in Australia said, "Hey, the first thing I noticed about you was you guys are involved in Aston Martin. Tell me about it." So it's a conversation starter, but it's also, like I said, because we are the digital transformation partner for Aston Martin, it's also a business opportunity for us.
And is corporate entertaining as well? Is that a big attraction of being attached to those things?
That will be over the longer term. That's the part that's not as activated right now, as sport is still in partial or whole lockdown. But yeah, we absolutely see opportunities in all our sponsorships to bring clients along, have more face-to-face conversations with them. And, while Aston Martin is one of the larger names that we attached ourselves with, the partnership, for instance, with the LPGA is really exciting. We have the largest purse in women's golf with the Cognizant Founders Cup. It allows us to have conversations with diversity and inclusion in bringing girls to sport, thinking about those sponsorship opportunities. So we were very careful in selecting our partners and what slice of the conversation allowed us to open.
Yeah, sounds good. Tell us a bit about the COVID work, because obviously you've been doing a lot to, mitigate the impacts of that and help people cope with it. So talk us through some of the nuts and bolts of the projects you've been involved on that over the past few months.
On the business side, companies been very involved behind the scenes, as we often are, in regards to helping our customers do what they needed to do. So, for instance, we have a product called Shared Investigator Platform. It allowed companies to do clinical trials without face-to-face interaction. So one of the vaccines, I won't say which, actually benefited of an acceleration of clinical trials by using our platform. But for our own employees and for India in particular, we are paying for 600,000 vaccines. So that's all of our employees in India and members of their family. We worked very closely with UNICEF and our own foundation, as well as our own employees. And we've put almost $9 million of cash to invest in infrastructure to help cope with the disease. We've also been very active in getting hospital beds in place and oxygen capabilities for those hospitals. But how do you tell that story? Well, we wrapped it up in a campaign which we call Operation C3, Cognizant Combats COVID-19. And this also came with accompanying media blitz. And the reason we felt telling the story externally was important was, one, to rejuvenate our employees so they knew we were fighting on their behalves. Another, frankly, it's an attraction opportunity from a recruiting standpoint. So people understand that we are a company that, not only has a heart, but that heart beats very loudly in India, where so many of our employees live. And then just in general, how do you take that beyond what would be the obvious tactics and then move to second and third tier markets to make sure families know how to get access to the resources that we're providing? How do we make sure that they understand where to get those benefits? So we really ran a blanket campaign in telling the story externally, as much for our own brand as it was to make sure that our own associates knew how to get the help they could leverage.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about purpose in business and purposeful business, and how stakeholders, whether that's staffers, whether that's your clients, whether that's analysts, are now looking at this much more closely. We just did a big feature on the second anniversary of the Business Roundtable signatures, 180 CEOs sort of reworking the statement of around which companies operate. You're a NASDAQ 100 company. When you've got stakeholders all over the world and different stakeholders within the US with different views, so how do you approach the purposeful business agenda?
Well, as you said, because you have different locations, often you attack a different slice in a different region. So, if you look at ESG, just in general, as an important platform for companies, the environmental piece is a piece that we know is incredibly important to our European colleagues. So, for instance, when we do sponsorship with something like Aston Martin, we make sure that we're involved in their green conversation, and we complement that with a sailing sponsorship so people know that we're in the game. When you talk about societal, are we focused in making sure that the right diversity inclusion lenses are being used in our communications and in our business tactics? And then, again, complemented with these significant partnership externally with PGA and LPGA. Governance is something that, is very much a part of how companies need to operate and operate properly in the environments in which they live and work. And, I think in general, that comes down to business results and having the right conversations to accelerate the conversations to do the right things. So there's no cookie cutter approach. You have to be very segmented in your thinking, and then think about beyond that first level, what are the stakeholders, how are you going to speak to them, and what slices and types of communications are going to be most effective in reaching them.
Yeah, now you've held comms roles across GE, across CA Technologies, IBM, Amgen, you mentioned now Cognizant. How do you think the profession has changed in terms of the things that are on your to-do list, the type of people you're hiring, the skills you need to be an effective communicator these days?
Well, it's interesting because when I arrived at Cognizant, actually, internal and external communications were separate organizations, and that was consolidated on my team about 4 months ago. And what we're finding is all the things I learned at GE and CA and IBM and Amgen are the evolution of the function needs to include sort of this ambidextrous approach. You know, how do you bring people that bring deep domain expertise maybe in one slice of our craft, but then are able to use the other hand and pull through? So if you consider yourself an internal communications specialist, do you know how to leverage social? Have you thought about using paid? Are you willing to talk to a journalist and, you know, really use the earned media approach? So when I think about staffing and, you know, rewarding parts of the team with the right kind of resources to get things done, it comes down to, are they looking at an ambidextrous strategy? Are they really considering all the tools that are in play? And they're going to be more effective communicators as a result, delivering business results.
Yeah, you've got to have a much more multi-skilled sort of set of tools to be a modern PR pro, haven't you? You've got to understand paid, social, and owned as well as earned. But if you do, you're really in a supremely powerful position, because that's where the action is. That's where stories are told. That's what drives a narrative, whether you're in PR, advertising, digital media, or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. And, you know, I'll give you an example of something we've done as part of our internal campaign to raise employee pride. Particularly in India, we have been spotlighting mid to senior level executives, and their career paths. And we selected one gentleman who runs our healthcare business, and he told his story, and it was a terrific story. We actually wrote it out as a script. We looked at it. He did an interview with our CEO. But then what we talked about was merchandising the story across multiple platforms so we could reach the audiences. So we took the original script. We then videotaped the conversation with the CEO. We then chopped it up into intranet stories that were digestible. We then dropped it into even smaller biteable clips and put that on Yammer. We then actually took the original core information and used that as a media pitch to speak to one of the largest newspapers in India. So we actually hit the entire continuum of audiences with one piece of content. And that's the type of thing I like to think through, is how do we maximize an executive's time, our own team's time, paid resources with agencies to get the most bang out of that story. And look, at the end of the day, the content is king, but I'll tell you, I've got 4 more of these sitting in the pipeline I'm ready to go do.
Yeah, for sure. And just finally, tell us about your sort of strategy toward returning to the office. I know you have a distributed workforce anyway, but is that, are you just following guidelines like everyone else, or do you have a specific take on it, especially at your sort of head office in Jersey?
Well, so our company as a digital company itself is deeply enabled to work wherever is required. So for us to work outside of the 4 walls that would be a company building is less important in order to get the job done. Now, would everybody like to get back together and have face-to-face conversations? Of course. But again, with 2/3 of our employees in India, where there is such a COVID hotspot, we're taking the right precautionary steps. We're not moving too fast. We are following our clients' leads. We're following country leads. And we're making sure to keep everybody safe. So we're not rushing to break down the doors. We're being watchful and thoughtful as each market opens up.
All right, Jeff. Well, good luck with that. Thanks for joining us on Coffee Break. Great to chat to you. And yeah, continued success. See if you can break those revenue numbers again in the next quarter.
We plan to. Steve, thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks.